Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Nix. I delved into the statistics of the role that white people play in South Africa. The generalized statement is that whites own 72% of the land. 70 to 80% of JSE-listed companies are owned by white people. Unfortunately, the uneducated people see that as you and I owning all of that. When you delve a little deeper and you look at the categories under these statements, we actually have a minimal role in South Africa's economy. The majority of people who own JSE-listed companies is the government. Then we have our top 8, which is our top 8 white billionaires. And then we have the majority owned by foreign companies. So I want to show you and then break down the misrepresentation from government. And that is the story everybody's hearing. There is nothing I can do about foreign companies owning the majority of the JSE. That is the ANC selling us out to the elitist white European man. So let's look at the land issue. 72% of farms held by 7.3% of the population. What is left out of that discussion and must absolutely be taken into account is that there are 7 categories of land ownership. The farm's agricultural holdings is a mere 30% of ownership. And of that 30%, whites own 72%. The majority of land is owned by the state. We have 19% owned by companies, 24% by trusts. The state sits at 23%. So there is a much deeper representation of ownership in South Africa. The Zulu Inkunzami Trust owns the most fertile land in South Africa. Hectares and hectares of it. But the rural agricultural land, sometimes the least fertile, is what everybody's fighting about because it's misrepresentation. That's just land. Let me quickly take you through JSE-listed entities. The BEE commissioner rocked up on the State of the Nation with Mike Sham. As one of the comments put it, Mike Sham, you have the patience of a saint. And I have to agree because I honestly feel like I would have just taken my microphone off and walked out of that interview. It was so frustrating. In that interview, the BEE commissioner says, he's talking about stock exchange. Anybody can acquire shares. It must happen. So we must change the racial composition of ownership. White people are 7.3% of the population. They own easily 70 to 80%.
I'm telling you. So you are referring to you're using that example, but actually that example conflates 2 things. All right. It's one thing for me to acquire shares. It's a market economy. All right. Stock exchange. Anybody can acquire shares in a company, and of course that must happen. All right. So we must change the racial composition of ownership because currently, white people are 7.3% of the population. They own easily 70-80%. All right. So we must change. We must change. Can I just finish my point? All right. Because I want to distinguish.
Mr. BEE Commissioner, let's break that 70 to 80% down though. Let's look at the subcategories of those percentages. Reeling off numbers over and over again is no longer good enough. See, whites owning 70 to 80% of companies isn't actually correct, and it doesn't mean all companies. If you're looking at the small formal businesses, which is the bulk of South Africa's economy, whites own 38%. That's down from 57% in 2009. For the larger private sector, And this is where the JSE listing and that ownership is spoken of. It says white and foreign ownership accounts for 61%, with black ownership at 39%. But please note that and foreign ownership accounts for 60%. Johann Rupert owns 50 companies listed. Nicky Oppenheimer, 6 to 8. Clive Calder, 2 to 3. Ivan Glassenberg, 10 to 15. Chris Becker, Naspers, 80 plus. Michelle Leroux, 3 to 5. Yanni Mountain, 7 to 10. Christopher Weiss, 6 to 8. If you look at the economic power of the JSE, which ties back to the top 8 white billionaires in South Africa, the top 40 firms dominate 80 to 90% of the total JSE value. The top 40 firms. And that is Remgro via Rupert and Naspers Prospers via Becker. Keep that in mind. Black ownership, 28 to 39%, direct, indirect. There are no 100% black-owned listed entities. And then the rest, the 60 to 70%, includes white South Africans and foreign. The vast majority of JSE-listed companies are actually held by large institutions, not individuals or families. The PIC, the Public Investment Corporation, a government-owned entity, holds between 10 to 20% in the top firms, and that is often broad public black South African ownership indirectly. Another huge component, asset managers. Alan Gray, Coronation, Investec, Sanlam, Old Mutual, unit trusts, savings, etc. And then we have 30 to 40% of the JSE overall is foreign-owned. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and other investors hold significant stake. No single white individual controls, boards, or executives manage any major component of South Africa's JSE-listed companies. So now think about this. The government's ranting off about this large proportion of whites controlling JSE-listed companies. The majority of it is the top 8, the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers and all of them, and then the others is foreign-owned. Essentially, you're never going to change the JSE ownership because you're never going to convince the likes of Vanguard to give you 30% of their company or force them to employ a specific ratio of people. And then let's also remember that not only is the government one of the big investors in the top 40, the majority of them are foreign-owned. On top of that, the government since 1998 have relaxed laws about taking money out of South Africa by foreign-owned entities. They allow these companies to remove their profits, to offshore them is the term. Profit shift is another term. They're actively allowing these big corporates who control the majority of the JSE to take those profits out of South Africa and not reinvest it in our country. So the very argument that the whites control it, yes, but not South African whites, foreign whites. And there is nothing I can do about that. So black ownership sits between 28 to 39%, either direct or indirect. If we say that the rest, 60 to 70%, includes white South Africans and foreign, you say that 40% of that is foreign, as I showed you earlier, and then as I showed you earlier, 14% is the top 8, which means that as a small group of family trusts, etc., the white ownership of JSE-listed companies actually sits at 16%. So taking out 39%, black ownership from the JSE-listed companies. We have 60 to 70%. 40% of that is foreign-owned. 14% of that is the top 8. That leaves you with 16% ownership of other white South Africans, which is almost the total of the top 8 ownership. So the concentration of wealth actually sits in the top 8 billionaires, many of which are families who benefited from apartheid, but not held accountable. I'm punished, you're punished. Johan Rupert's a billionaire. 16% of the JSE is held by other white South Africans, excluding foreign-owned, excluding the top 8 billionaires. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the details within these absurd statistics, which I feel haven't changed from 1994. I mean, we've literally been repeating the same statistics since 1994. So in closing, think about it. 30% of all South African land is rural agricultural, and 70% of that is owned by the white population. Some of it are trusts, some of it are companies, but it's not the entire South Africa. The Zulu Ngungami Trust owns more fertile land. The state is the biggest land owner in South Africa. And then really, the white population owns 70% of the 30% of total land. Not as much as you think. Companies listed on the JSE, because BEE Commissioner, who really doesn't have his facts in order, shout out to Mike Sham, says that 70-80% of, stocks and JSE-listed companies is in the hands of the white man. 40% of that is foreign, of which we can do nothing about. The government cannot do anything about 40%. Then to think that 14% is owned by just 8 individuals leaves you with a mere 16%. And that 16% isn't owned by individuals. It's families and medium-sized companies obtaining shares. I think the bigger question is that why is there no 100% black-owned companies listed on the JSE? Because the government keeps the informal sector informal at an estimated 2.5 trillion rand turnover for 1 year, untaxed, unregulated. So the stats are very skewed. And let's make sure we look at those stats really, look at the granular level of these stats. 16%. I have no control over the 14% from apartheid-era beneficiaries, or the 40% of foreign-owned companies. What do you guys think about that? It really isn't that. I also think it's a little unfair that we don't include the stats from coloureds and Indians. Let's give a fairer representation of what's happening here. Let's not just look at one category amongst the 7 for land. Do you guys agree with me? At the end of the day, my maths might be out by a couple of numbers, and that's fine. But the point is that 40% of our JSE is owned by foreign companies. So 54%, half of the JSE is owned by foreign and the top 8. And then the government own the other 40, leaving a meager 10 to 16% for the rest of the white people in South Africa. And is that just white? What about coloureds? What about Indians? Where do they fit into all of this? This constant comparison with white and black. But we have a whole bunch of other nationalities. Imagine how left out they feel. It's because the ANC want to distort the facts and make us look like we continue to hold the majority of people in South Africa in poverty. We're the reason they're, impoverished. But what they're not recognizing is that without a functioning state, without functioning infrastructure, you can't expect a child to get through school, university, etc., when there are no roads, public transport is dismal, there's no nutritional feeding scheme, when she or he gets home, there's no electricity, there's no water. Those are the things that give the people the capacity to go and seek further education. So my message for the ANC is take a step back, focus on the basics, let's get that right, and then we can talk about the rest. Because the more you keep talking in circles, the further and further away this target is. And the only people getting rich are the likes of you, the ANC, and this top 8 billionaires. We need to make people aware that the stats do not actually represent reality. They are broad-based and divisive. We also need to understand that the ANC has done nothing about this. In fact, they've made it easier for foreign companies to remove their profit over the years. These foreign-owned companies, that 40% of foreign-owned companies, doesn't invest their money back into South Africa, building schools, helping to upgrade the infrastructure. They shift their profits overseas, so they report less in South Africa, they pay less tax. The informal settlement doesn't pay tax, but the strain they put on public resources and the taxpayer is monumental, but absolutely no contribution to the economic value of our country. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem I guess nobody's really talking about, because it really is just about being divisive, it seems. Mainstream media screaming incorrect stats, and then the not-so-mainstream media is then defending the stats, and round we go. Meanwhile, the ANC is taking loans from the EU and the World Bank, etc., are selling their souls to Iran, and really the taxpayers are running around in circles trying to make ends meet. This is the detail we should be sharing with each other, guys. Let's make sure we ask our mainstream media, our public officials, anybody who talks about these stats, let's ask them to expand. What are the subcategories behind this elusive 70 to 80% ownership? We have foreign, we have corporate, we have trusts, we have individual. And what part of all of that is South African rights? Approximately 30%, you say, of which 50% of that is in the hands of just 8 people. See, now that would create a very different discussion, wouldn't it? The moral of the story? Let's distinguish between the billionaires in South Africa and their ownership, as well as the other white South Africans. Because we're not all the Ruperts and the Oppenheimers. The government and mainstream media are hiding about these umbrella statistics. But this is the truth, more or less. I might be out by a couple of numbers. Never mind that. The point is, we don't own the entire 70 to 80% of the JSE. Chill, Mr. BEE Commissioner. Drop me a comment and let me know, firstly, if my numbers are correct, but also, it's correct that we challenge these statistics and actually look at the subcategories, the detail. Let's stop letting mainstream media and public officials drown us out with these flamboyant statistics. Because even if they did, and even if those statistics were right, our question should be, and you, the ANC, what have you done to alleviate any of this for the 30 years you've been in power? Because otherwise, in 30 years, we're going to be doing this exact same conversation. Guys, if you found this video insightful, I would love to hear from you. Drop me a comment and then support me with a subscribe and a like. Nikki and Paul, shout out to you guys, part of the Rambles Club. I appreciate any and all support, guys, even if all you did today was watch until the end. Have a fabulous week. Be the most amazing human being that you can be. Over and out.